The mission behind Real Life Moms is to connect moms through real conversations. So let's start building this connection by telling one friend about the Real Life Moms podcast. After you listen to this podcast, share it with your friend and let's grow together. And now for this week's episode. Hi, and welcome to Real Life Moms. I'm your host, Lisa Foster. And Real Life Moms is a podcast that's all about connecting moms through real parenting conversations. I believe that moms have so much insight and knowledge, and together we are powerful. On this podcast, we give moms a voice to tell their stories, share their expertise and resources through real conversations. And this week we are joined by Brad Baldridge, who is a college funding specialist and has helped thousands of families plan and save for college. He's the host of Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Brad has become one of the nation's leading college planning and college financial experts. He has offered life-changing advice through his private practice, online platforms, numerous workshops, seminars, and events each year. And today, Brad is sharing his knowledge with us on how to plan and pay for college. Hi, Brad. Welcome to Real Life Moms. I am really actually in need of your wisdom because you're a college funding specialist and you help parents learn ways to save for college, which I definitely need. You help them maximize financial aid and help families avoid student loans, which I would love to learn more about. So as a parent myself who has a daughter getting ready to navigate through college and this whole experience in about another year or two, I'm just so thankful that you're here to talk to us about this process.
Yeah, well, it's nice to be here.
So maybe you could just start by telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and some of the services you provide.
I'm a financial advisor by training, so I've earned my CFP 23 years ago, something like that, and been doing general financial planning for my whole career. But in the last 15 years or so, I started focusing in on what I call late stage college planning. And late stage college planning is you've got a high school student and you're trying to figure it all out. And as compared to early stage, which is, again, maybe you have kids in middle school or grade school, or even maybe just, hey, we're pregnant, let's start figuring out college. All that, is great to do. But even when you do all of that, when you get to late stage, there's that extra layer of complexity where, all right, now we need to start figuring out, well, what colleges might be a good fit. And we're going to have to fill out applications for admissions, fill out applications for financial aid. There's a lot more to do. Even if you did a great job early stage and you have a big pile of money, you still want to, again, do things wisely and come up with, a way to not spend all the money if you don't have to.
I love that you said that because I think we started kind of early, like we did one of those college funds, but I definitely feel late stage as I'm getting closer to it because like you said, there's so much that comes up from it. So I'm glad that you can talk about that as well as early stages.
Yes, absolutely.
You're talking about like the right fit of school. So I see my daughter looking through colleges. She's super excited. She knows the right fit for her. But I don't really understand, how do you find out what the right financial fit is and that you're more comfortable paying for college? Is there like a way to figure that out?
Oh, yes, for sure. It's not easy potentially because of the complexities and now that college has. I liken college to healthcare where, we added in insurances to help pay for things. And then we have these different kinds of insurance and we can save money, and every layer just adds an extra layer of complexity. Same thing has been happening with college where they started out with maybe some basic loans that could help students. And then they added grants and scholarships and federal aid and state aid and aid from the colleges themselves. And it just got more and more complicated. And along with that, of course, the price went up. So I think the biggest challenge for most families is there's a published price for most colleges that you can find on their website. Generally, it's called cost of attendance. And the reason we use cost of attendance is it's supposed to be an all-inclusive number. And the government essentially said all colleges need to publish a cost of attendance and make it available so that we can do an apples-to-apples comparison. And cost of attendance includes tuition, room and board, books, fees, and beer and pizza. Or in other words, travel and spending money. So most freshmen going off to college, they're going to get a bill for their tuition and fees and their room and board. They're going to pick a meal plan and pick a dorm and pick some classes, and that will ultimately determine their bill each semester. But in addition to that, there's a couple of additional expenses called travel and personal expenses. And travel is an estimate of what it might cost for the student to get back and forth from home to school. And personal expenses are things like dates and cell phones and laundry and all the stuff that students will need to do outside of those direct bills. Now, most families already cover that for their kids, right? Laundry gets done for your high school kids, and they have a cell phone, and typically it's on mom and dad's plan, and it's probably not going to change while they're in college. So a lot of that stuff is perhaps covered, but then you're going to get a direct bill for tuition and room and board. Now, the cost of attendance these days varies from about $25,000 at a lower cost state school all the way up to $86,000 for the most expensive private schools. And for many families, that's quite the shock of how on earth would we pay $85,000 a year for college? And the right answer is many of us will not pay that kind of money, because although that's the list price at a college, it isn't necessarily the price that you're going to pay. Just like when they talk about, well, this medicine is crazy expensive, but then insurance gets involved, and next thing you know, it's a different price altogether. It's the same thing happens with college, where especially at the private schools, they tend to offer aid, typically scholarships, either need-based or merit, that bring your net price down. So one of the things that I offer on my website is a net price of colleges by income that kind of gives the average cost of a typical college. And what you'll find is many colleges are reasonably competitive with the local state for the right student. So that means, maybe your state school is $25,000 all in, and the private school you're looking at might be $60,000 list or $70,000 list price. But after scholarships and everything else, maybe it's $25,000 for the state school and $32,000 for the private school. Or sometimes it's even better, right? The private school is actually a lower cost option. So the state school is $25,000 and the private school is $22,000 or something like that.
Yeah, I have heard that. I have friends that exactly that case scenario happened to them, where the private school was lower after the scholarships and things that they offered than their state school. So I was shocked at that. And I think that is great for parents to know. Right,
for sure. And then the other, and I use 25,000 as, I guess the official average, the last one I saw was 27,000 for a state school. But many states are substantially more than that. Illinois comes to mind, and I think New Jersey, some of the East Coast. California has their UC schools, which are University of California. So UCLA and some of those schools, in-state prices close to $35,000. So they're substantially more. But they also have the California state system. So they've got two systems in California, and that one is more in the $25,000, $28,000 range. So they kind of have a low cost and a high cost option in California, both state schools. So there's lots of options out there, and then understanding, what your net cost is going to be. So that's where the challenge comes in. It's like knowing that it exists is the first step. Then the next step is, well, how do I know if, it's like if I walked down to a car dealership and the price in the windows on some cars was 80 and some cars was 50 and some was 20, but I didn't know what kind of discounts. Some of them are half off, or some of them are 75% off, and some of them are full price. It's a very confusing situation where I would look at that expensive car if I knew it was going to be half off, but I don't know. So how do I figure that out? And that's the challenge that many families are up against. And as you work with colleges and you actually go through the financial aid process, in the end, you'll know. And before you have to make a decision, you'll know. And there's ways to predict ahead of time. So a lot of colleges, as an example, will have what's called a net price calculator on their website that will help you. You put in your financial information, and sometimes also you put in grades and that kind of stuff for the student, and it will come back with an estimate of what it might cost. Now, those net price calculators, some of them are very good and they're right on, and others of them are obvious that the college put it there because the government required it. It doesn't really work very well. As an example, I was at a college the other day looking at their net price calculator, and one of the questions was, what was your income in 2013? And it's like, obviously they haven't updated it in a long time because it still had really old questions in it. So that's also with a grain of salt. But it's one of the things that I help families with. I have some software now where I can actually, put school lists together and compare them to the family finances and calculate need-based aid and calculate merit aid and get a preliminary estimate at a lot of the schools. Now, some schools are very predictable because they have, they share that on their website and that type of thing. Other schools are not as predictable because they aren't willing to share as much. So in the end, the ultimate situation will be when you actually apply and get an offer. That's when you know for sure what it will cost.
Right.
Prior to that, sometimes there's a good ways to estimate it. And then, of course, at a lot of state schools, and this is starting to change, but at a lot of state schools, they just generally didn't offer a lot of discounts to begin with, especially if your income was, in the 75,000 plus range. You didn't qualify for a lot of federal money, and the states don't have a lot of money in a lot of states for higher income families. They have something for very low income families, which means you're going to pay the full price at a state school. But the full price at a state school was typically still a low cost option because they start so low. So that's the challenge so families are saying, well, wait a minute, even 15 or 20,000 is way out of our range. Yeah. Well, as your income gets lower, say below 75,000, now there's additional grants and additional state aid, additional guarantees out there now that will help in that situation.
So Brad, can I ask, just to clarify, that net price calculator on the site, do you have to do that for each school? Because each school, depending on your grades and things like that and income, would have different offers? Or is it
That's
just
correct.
so each school. Okay.
Right. Exactly. So it's a lot of work to, any particular school. If you say, well, I just want to know what this school is going to cost. Well, in 20 minutes or half an hour, once you kind of learn the system, and the first time it might take you an hour and a half, but eventually you can learn kind of how to do that. And again, sometimes those calculators are obviously not very reliable, so you're kind of wasting your time. But where they are reliable, you can get that answer. The challenge is, well, tell me which schools are going to give me a good answer without me going to 4,000 schools and doing this 4,000 times. Because there's a lot of schools out there, and it's, like I said, it's just a challenge. And it's, again, for most families, there's going to be some strategy around, well, we're going to look at some of the local state schools as an option. They might automatically be the price to beat, but then don't disqualify, the elite privates or any sort of private school automatically. Because again, depending on your situation, if you get a $30 or $40 or $50,000 scholarship at a school that costs $60,000, well, they could very well be in the running.
Yeah.
And I hear that a lot, early on, where people say, well, we can't afford a school that costs $60,000. And it's like, well, if that school tends to offer aid for particular types of students, and sometimes it's academics, sometimes it's athletics, sometimes it's based on need, sometimes it's a combination of all those things, then you can obviously get a better price. Right. And then there's all the outside things, right? So the first step for most families is you find a school at an acceptable net price. And then from there, you pay that net price as efficiently as you can. Hypothetically, if the state school at 25,000 is around where you end up, again, most parents don't pay 25,000 because, the student could earn something, summers and weekends and whatever. So they might be able to contribute $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Typically, a student can also borrow $5,500 in their own name right out of the gate. So that's another, so maybe 10,000 off of that. So maybe there's 15 left over. And if the parent has had some sort of savings along the way, maybe they've got 10 or 20 or $30,000 tucked away. And then you get to the finals and say, oh, and with the kids out of the house, maybe we would have $300 or $500 a month, especially when they say, we were paying all those sports fees and the club soccer and all that stuff, and you add all that up, that was $500 a month. We'll stop doing that because they're now off to college, and we'll start contributing that towards their actual, college expenses. So then you kind of piecemeal it together and say, well, 1,000, 5,000 comes from here and 10,000 comes from there, and you can build a plan. And that's, again, I get simplifying things a little bit or oversimplifying things a little bit, but that's kind of the process of how do we find a school at a good price. And then
piece it together.
Right. But there's a new wrinkle there is how do we know that is the best price that we're going to get
Yes.
at school?
Yeah. How do you know that? Yeah. How do you know
Right.
that where the coupons are, the discounts?
Right. Exactly. And that's where, again, having some experience and, in the end, one strategy that many people will employ, right, is they will apply to 2 or 3 state schools or more, and a handful of private schools or more. So now they've got 10 or 12 offers, and they can literally compare the offers and say, this school is net 27,000, and this one's net 29, and this one's 32, and this one's 38, and this one seems way out of line because this one's at 62. Now, ideally, your student loves the lowest cost option, and life is good.
Right.
Almost never works out that way in my experience, but it would be ideal. So then there is some opportunity potentially to go back to the schools that your student's truly interested in and see if they can do better based on an appeal process or that type of thing.
Wow. So you can appeal the package they give you? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Wow. I did not know that. How,
Right.
how does that work?
Right. Well, so in general, because it's a complicated process, a lot of times colleges will make mistakes or the parents will make mistakes when they fill out forms or whatever it will be. And you can certainly appeal on that process, right? Of, well, I had 400,000 in my 401k and I put it on the FAFSA, and now I've learned that I shouldn't have. So that, messed up my calculations. So I want to go back to the school and tell them about the error and get them to correct it, and then see if I could get a better offer. So that type of thing. But there's also changes in circumstances that colleges will consider. Things like, death, disability, divorce, sudden changes. Some of the, like Hurricane Katrina was the first one that I was real familiar with, where, lots of people with lots of high income and so forth were disqualified from financial aid because they had a good paying job. And then Katrina came along and the business was gone and they didn't have any job at all. And
right.
they were able to go back to the colleges and say, well, this is based on a tax return from almost 2 years ago, and that's not my reality anymore. And the government gave those colleges a lot of permission to correct and, adjust things for the new reality in the hurricane zones. So that's a common disaster relief situation. But, and again, it's also, well, 2 years ago we were married and that was our nice tax return, but now we're divorced and things are different, or someone unfortunately passed away or whatever it might be. And that's, all those things are grounds. And then the reality of it is you can also just say, well, I love your school, except the price is too high. I've got better offers at other schools. Do you want to get in the ballpark so I can come to my first choice, or mom and dad are going to make me go to some place that isn't quite so expensive? And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't.
Right. Well, what I say, it can't hurt to ask, right?
That's exactly right. And some people are a little shy about that, but I've never heard of anyone like losing their offer because they asked for more money.
Right. And are the students actually doing this? Because you're talking as if you're a student asking, or are these the parents calling?
Ideally, it's the student. This is right. I mean,
yeah, they should. Right.
Exactly. Once we get to college, they're supposedly big boys and girls, and it's their life. And mom and dad, and again, colleges understand the reality that mom and dad are also probably paying at least some of it or helping in some way. But in the end, what doesn't look good is when the parents are, actively engaged in discussions about how much this costs and how it will work, and the students sitting in the corner playing on their phone.
Right.
I mean, that is not good. The student ideally would be able to say things like, I really love this school and I want to make it happen, but I need your help. And, right now, mom and dad are willing to pay and help me this much, but that's not going to get me all the way there. So I've got a gap to fill. And like I said, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But the student definitely needs to be involved.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's great. Can you talk a little bit about like where to even find scholarships, different scholarships? How far ahead do you plan these? And do schools have their own scholarships, or are they generalized for, you apply to something and it just can go anywhere? How does that work?
Yes. So, yeah. So on my website, we've got the scholarship guide for busy parents that is 4 videos and kind of answers all these questions in much more detail. But in general, there's 2 main types of scholarships. There's need-based scholarships and there's merit scholarships. So a need-based scholarship essentially is based on family finances, typically, where it's like, okay, based on your relatively low income and our high price, you're going to need help. So this is what we can offer you. And that's what when we fill out the FAFSA form or fill out the CSS profile, that's the whole financial aid application process.
Okay. So that's actually considered financial aid. Is that
Correct.
right? Okay.
Right. But they're going to give it to you and call it a scholarship often. Mm-hmm. Although grant kind of means the same thing. And but that implies again, it's based on need. Everybody likes the idea of my kid got a scholarship. It sounds better.
Sounds so much better. Yeah. It's like you're a winner.
Exactly. So they may as well call it that, even if it is need-based. Mm-hmm. And then of course there's the merit-based, where colleges are saying, for strong academic students, we're willing to do this. For athletes, we're willing to do that. For future leaders or whatever groups they're trying to attract, right? So they used to do it in a kind of a little more altruistic way, where they essentially said anybody that has test scores like that and grades like this, and they qualify for 10,000. And then if you have better grades like this and test scores like that, you get 20,000. But now there's also a little bit of an element of what they're doing, what we would call enrollment management, which is if I give them $20,000 and they come, but they would have come had I given them 10, well, then I foolishly gave them 10,000 more than I needed to. So they're trying to figure out what's the least amount that they can give you to get you to come. And you're trying to figure out how can I get the most amount. Mm-hmm. So that game is a little more real than it used to be, where, what is it going to take to close the deal today kind of talk occasionally does come up around, pricing and that kind of stuff. But in general, merit aid is, so that would fall under the merit aid category, although it doesn't sound much like merit aid, because it's really, again, just trying to get the student to actually come. But merit aid often would be, like I said, having test scores and grades and that type of stuff. Now, those types of scholarships can come from multiple sources. So certainly the federal government offers grants, which would be need-based. So the Pell Grant and the supplemental grant. Many states offer grants and or scholarships. So Georgia and Florida have some pretty substantial scholarships that are merit-based, where if you do this in high school and you have these kind of grades or these kind of test scores, they've got money. And if you don't do those things, you'll get less or nothing. So, and then to support that, they also may have, and if you're low income, you have a need, then we've got these programs as well. So every state kind of has their own mismatch of different choices and aid. And some states are much more beneficial than others. So the top states are averaging $2,000 per student, and the bottom states are averaging $20 per student. So some states really believe in it and are offering a lot of different programs, and other states, don't do much as far as helping.
And is this, do you apply for the state that you live in? Like, I'm in Colorado, my child would apply for a state scholarship in Colorado, but would that be transferred if we go to an out-of-state school?
Generally not. So most state aid is available to state residents to be used at a local state school, or perhaps at a in-state private school as well.
Okay.
So depending on the program, some of them are very limited to, maybe just tech colleges or maybe in-state four-year colleges. Some programs are any school in the state just about. And there's a few programs out there where you can take that aid and go elsewhere with it, other states and that type of thing. Or some states might have a little bit of a reciprocity where they say, if you stay in our state, you get, $2,200. If you go to this other state where we got a reciprocity agreement, it's worth $900. And that state's doing the same thing back towards us. So some sort of agreement and what's going on there is a lot of states, especially the smaller states, they don't have enough colleges to have every major available. And they figured out that maybe it's just easier for some of those unusual majors or more challenging things to set up to say, well, you could just go to the neighboring state for that major. We have a medical school, they have the dental school. That's, so that we're not all duplicating everything all the time. And sometimes it is around something as common as, like I said, medical and dental schools, but often it might be around something a little more esoteric, like animal behavior or, some specific actuarial accounting or something, where there's just not a lot of students that take it. So it's, they try and consolidate it in fewer schools. When we're looking at scholarships, again, there's the sources. So the colleges themselves offer it. And you need to be aware that at college, a lot of colleges, they have these automatic scholarships. All you have to do is apply for admissions. And there's some scholarships, they'll look at as part of admissions, they learn about your grades and your test scores and your class rank and the courses you took and all that stuff. And that's enough for them to also decide, well, you qualify for this scholarship or that scholarship. In addition to that, they might have need-based programs, which then require the family to fill out financial aid forms. So it could be the FAFSA and also the CSS profile at some schools. So there's essentially financial aid forms. You fill them out. Usually the parents are deeply involved in that step, and those get submitted. And then they determine based on your need how much you might be able to receive as well. And then on top of that, there might be a few scholarships out there that will require additional effort. It might be an additional application, additional essay, some sort of application. And then a lot of times these are the very prestigious full ride type scholarships and they might look at your general application and invite you to apply for the full ride because you're the type of student that might win it, or they might not. And they say, well, if you're not interested enough in our school that you dug deep enough to find out that this scholarship exists, then we don't need more applications for the scholarship. It's already hard enough to pick from the 200 we get. So we're not going to encourage other families to it. That's one of the kind of tests to figure out if you deserve it. It's on our website. If you didn't bother to look at it, then maybe you're not deserving of it, because the people that are excited about our school and need scholarships are always reading the scholarship section, and they obviously know all about it. So that's the process there. And then we have all the what we would call the outside scholarships that come from all the other areas that might provide scholarships. So where mom and dad work and play, the local high school, Bill Gates Foundation gives out some very big prestigious scholarships. Buick and insurance company, there's the Coca-Cola Scholars as an example. And some of these scholarships, like the Coca-Cola Scholarship, they give away, I think it's $20,000 and something like 250 awards. So that adds up to millions of dollars every year.
Wow. Yeah.
But for those 250 awards, they get 90,000 applications.
Right.
And if you look at who those students are that win, they're going to Harvard and Yale. They're the rock stars of the academic world. And great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And then like the Bill Gates Scholarship is targeted to families that have a high need. So if you look at things like, if you qualify for a Pell Grant, which is a very need-based program, then you're eligible to participate in the Gates Foundation Scholarship. That makes you eligible, but they still have a lot of merit aid that goes with it as well, where they're saying not only do you have to be financially eligible, but we're also looking for strong students on top of that. So it has both criteria, a high need-based component, because that's their goal, is to help families that have a need. And they're looking for the academic strong students where they feel like their need would make a difference in their life.
Where are all these listed if a parent would want to search? So some are on the actual college sites, the ones that are through the college itself. And then the others would be where? Right.
So, and again, that's part of the process, but, and that's explained in the scholarship guide as well. But so you certainly, in the old days, when I went to college, and I'm a bit older than you, it sounds like, but there was a file drawer in the school counselor's office because the internet hadn't been invented yet. And so you'd go flip through that scholarship drawer and or talk to the school counselor, and they might have an inkling of what's in there and who might be a good fit and that kind of stuff. So then at a lot of schools, that's moved online now. So there's some sort of web page, or maybe there's a Google Doc that the counselors share, or whatever it might be, where there's a list of stuff that's available. And another great example is here in my community, there's a couple suburbs that have a scholarship committee at the high school that has been working for years and years and years to encourage all the local businesses to participate. So there's 40 or 50 awards at that high school because all the local businesses chip in, and they're not always huge awards, but there might be a $5,000 award and a $2,000 award, and they're targeted for all different things. And other schools, it's not quite as robust, but most high schools have something.
Right.
And then an obvious check is where mom and dad work. Because a lot of, like Home Depot has a program for their hourly workers where they will help the children of their hourly workers with scholarships. And there's a way, it's on their website. There's a way to apply. I can't remember. It's something about Orange, the Orange Network, or I can't remember what it's called exactly.
That's great.
But there's those types of things, and UPS offers stuff, and Walmart and Starbucks and Chipotle, and sometimes the student needs to work there, and sometimes the parent or the student could work there. So there's all these different types of connections. And then there's the unusual scholarships. Like if you're interested in archery, there's probably archery scholarships. If you're interested in skateboarding, there's probably those kind of scholarships. There's, all these different little pockets of, are there some ethnicities like Lithuanian or something? Some of them have some very active communities that provide scholarships. I was, obviously you can't see me, but I have red hair. There's literally a scholarship out there for people with red hair.
Wow. Did you win?
I did not apply. I didn't know about it till I was in my professional phase here, when working with families. And it looked like it kind of died on the vine because the information was a little bit old. But when I read about it, it was a very small amount, like $300 or something. And it essentially said I started this scholarship because I looked for one and I couldn't find it. So I felt obligated to create one.
Oh, that's great.
So, scholarships is a area that, one of the challenges I think, though, is that you're never done searching, right? It's like buying an airline ticket, right? So you log into your favorite travel sites and you start looking for an airline ticket. And the first one you find is $1,000. The next one you find is $800, and then $700. And then you find a couple at $600. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, I can't seem to do much better than $600. And then, oh, there's one for $550. And then 4 hours later, it's still $550. And you say, well, that was a waste of 4 hours. So there's that diminished returns of, are there scholarships for left-handed soccer players? Maybe. I looked in all the usual spots. I didn't find any. I've been Googling it. I've been doing all the various search techniques I know and so forth. I still haven't found it, but that doesn't prove it doesn't exist. That's the challenge. Whereas if it's, looking for the scholarship at work, that one's easy, right? You talk to HR, you talk to a few people that have gone before and had college kids. And if you come up with nothing, there's a good chance it just doesn't exist. Or search the website would be the other ones. Put in scholarship into the company's website, and sometimes there's some sort of online community for the workers themselves where they can log in and see their paychecks and that kind of stuff. Search through that type of stuff, and if you come up with nothing, then it probably doesn't exist, and you can just move on.
Now, Brad, does getting a merit scholarship, will that affect a need grant or scholarship, if you will, for somebody in need? Like if they are getting one of those higher scholarships, does it take away some of the financial aid?
Yes. Yes, it could. So the way it works is, generally speaking, you calculate what's called your expected family contribution is what it used to be called. It's changing, and this is another topic to maybe spend a few minutes on, but they're revamping how the FAFSA and financial aid works, effective for students that are going to college in 2024. Juniors right now. Yep.
Yeah.
So they're changing how the rules work. So their terminology is changing from EFC to SAI, but they kind of mean the same thing. So what happens is you fill out your financial aid forms. That helps you determine what your EFC or SAI is going to be. So let's say your EFC comes in at $20,000, which would be a typical middle income. If your income is 80, 90, 100,000, somewhere in there, 20,000 would be a reasonable EFC estimate. So what that means essentially is you look at the price of the school. So if you look at your local state school, if it costs 25,000 minus 20,000, you're eligible for $5,000 of need-based aid. Now, if that same student looks at that $65,000 private school, the EFC is the same at 20,000, but now it's 65 minus 20 is 45,000. So you'll need a lot more. Now, in both cases, just because you need it doesn't mean you're going to get it. You could, but there's no guarantee, especially at some state schools where it's like, well, we don't have enough aid to fill everybody's need. Therefore, we're just going to have to gap you. And that's the unfortunate truth. So you need 20, they can only give you 10, let's say, or whatever the numbers are. But in that same situation, if you needed $5,000 and you got a $5,000 merit award, well, now your need went away. And that's called displacement. And colleges don't particularly like it either. So a lot of the time they'll work with the family and they'll, as an example, try and delete some of the loans that are considered aid versus the grants and other things that are, free money. But they try and balance it out. But there is that component of need-based aid being affected by what you receive on the merit side of things.
Okay. And that all comes to you at once? Like you find out about your package all at once from the school? It's not like you learn about your merit and then learn about your aid?
Sometimes you will hear a little bit about potential scholarships. Private schools like to get that out early so that you continue down the road and continue the process. So as an example, we have a family that applies to one of the local, more expensive private schools, or the student applies and maybe mom and dad aren't even that aware that the student applied and they get accepted and they're all excited and go to mom and go, hey, like I got into whatever, Loyola or Marquette or whatever college you want to pick. And they're like, oh, that's great. And then they see the price tag and go, oh, wait a minute, 65,000. That's not so great. I don't think we can go there. Well, so some of these colleges now, along with acceptance, will also say, and congratulations, you won our presidential scholarship or our provost scholarship or our whatever name they, our Bucky scholarship or whatever their mascot is, or who knows what they call it, but it's 20,000 off or 25,000 off. And then there's a little asterisk and it kind of says something to the effect of, well, this is what we've been able to award you so far. We'll continue to work on your financial aid forms and that kind of stuff. And there may be more, but this is a start. And why do they do that? Again, so that parents don't pull the plug on it already and say, well, we're not even sending financial aid forms to that school because, they're way too expensive. So it kind of keeps them in the process. And then later on, you'll get an official offer. So if you look at the overall timeline, I think that's important for most families to understand, is you apply in the fall of your senior year for both financial aid and admission. And then somewhere in the winter time or later, you're going to hear about being accepted. Now, some of the prestigious colleges like the Harvards and Yales, they have an official, this is the day when you can find out if you're accepted or not. And everybody finds out all at once. It's the big reveal on a Tuesday at 5 p.m. And then some colleges actually pick the same date every year, right? So they use the first Tuesday in March or something like that. And then a couple other colleges have decided to be on that same day so that if you applied to Harvard and Yale and Princeton, and all three of them are going to tell you at the exact same time or whatever. And again, I don't know which schools are on the exact same dates, but that's kind of the concept of there's an official date where everybody hears. Many other schools, though, do what's called a rolling admission or something like that, where you apply, we'll do our thing in 6 to 8 weeks, and then we'll send you a letter or somehow let you know if you've been accepted or not. And sometimes if you're on the bubble where they're saying, well, we're not sure if there's going to be a spot for you or not, you're kind of questionable. They might defer you and say, well, we can't make a decision early for you. We'll defer you and we might accept you in March or something later. But right now the answer is maybe. And then that's the winter time, maybe into the springtime. And then along with that, they're going to now send out official offers that has their official cost of attendance and a list of all the aid that you're going to get from the college. And they are also the administrators for the state aid and the federal aid, so they can put that on there as well. So they'll say, you're going to get this federal grant and this federal grant and this state grant and this state loan and this federal loan. And then from the college itself, you're going to get this scholarship. And this all adds up to this. And then if you want, you can also take a federal loan like this or a federal loan like that to fill the gaps. And this is the official offer. And there's some rules about what they have to have on them and what they include and so forth, but they very seldom look, very much alike. So it's really hard for some families to really compare because the language is kind of confusing to them. And which of these loans is truly an award and which of these loans is just a loan to fill the gap, because that's the reality of, there's a PLUS loan out there as an example. That's a federal loan from the federal government. And the amount that you can borrow is the cost of college minus any other aid. So automatically that loan can be big enough to cover the cost of college, because if you go to an expensive school and get no aid, well, you can borrow the full amount on that loan. If you go to a low cost school and get a lot of aid and there's only a little bit left, that's the maximum amount of that loan. It's always going to be the cost of attendance. So, the way I explain it is you could borrow $85,000 to go to Harvard on that loan. I'm not saying you should. I'm saying you could. And the reality is lots of people don't pay. Harvard's very generous. So a lot of the elite schools, their costs are actually the low cost option for a lot of families because of how generous they are with their endowments and so forth. So that's the kind of the timeline the senior year. And there's deadlines and, a process. What's completely missing for most families is there's no deadlines really in the junior year.
Yeah.
And that's what trips up a lot of families. And I think you mentioned you got a high school kid, sophomore or a junior?
Junior. Yeah.
Junior, right. So
what's the most important things in your junior year?
Right. So what I tell people is, based on the timeline we just talked about, is the fall is going to be busy with applying to colleges, filling out financial aid forms and all that kind of stuff. So let's get some stuff done before then if we can. So the ideal situation, and again, maybe for your situation, maybe there's not enough time to completely recover yet, but you should have a good working school list by the end of your junior year. In other words, we've thinking we're going to apply to these 6 or 7 schools. We might delete 1 or 2 and we might add 1 or 2, but this is pretty close to what we're going to do. And we're pretty happy with it. Now, ideally, to go with that, you've done obviously your research and visits and that type of stuff to know that it's a good fit schools from the student's perspective. It has the majors they want or career paths or whatever it is, and it's a school they could see themselves going to. But the other side of that coin is all the financial stuff of, what is not just the list price, but what is the net price? And will we get need-based aid or merit aid? So all the stuff we've just been talking about, once you learn all that stuff and apply it, you should have a good idea that, on this list, the state schools should be $25,000. And if we did our work properly, these other schools will be in the $25,000 to $35,000 range. And then these 3 schools, we tried to figure it out, but we couldn't. So they could be good or they could be bad. And if they're bad, we've already talked with the student and they understand that if they don't come in at a decent price, the answer is no. But they chose to apply anyway, right?
Yeah.
Versus kind of that rug being pulled out from under the student, which happens a lot, is, we didn't understand the process and now we're here and the schools that he fell in love with are crazy expensive. What do we do?
Right. Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. You write a big check. You talk him off the ledge. You make him borrow a bunch of money. I mean, I don't know. There's not a good solution. And in the back of my head, I'm going, well, you messed up a year ago when you didn't have the college talk.
Right. So they should be looking at schools, and almost like before you're visiting, you should maybe just tap into those websites and put in your numbers to make sure that they would be somewhat of a match.
Right. Exactly. And right. And, and this is the stuff I help families with all the time I think that's another decision to think about is college is getting more complex, and there's a lot of experts out there that can help you with various things if you so chose. And again, not everybody needs everything. but my focus is I work with parents on need-based aid and merit aid and scholarships and how are we going to pay and saving and investing, and will this destroy our retirement or not, and some of that kind of stuff. But there are experts that can help with essays, or you have an athlete. There are experts that understand how the football recruiting process works at the Big Ten schools, or I mean, you name it, they're out there. And sometimes it's as simple as reading a book, or as complicated as hiring a high-priced expert. I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't. I think there's a little bit of buyer beware and understanding what you're getting into, because it's a stressful, emotional time. So I think sometimes families are a little vulnerable to sales pitches that maybe aren't quite appropriate. But on the flip side, if you thought about, if my student came to me and said, I want to learn how to play the piano, and as a parent, I don't know how to play the piano. It's like, well, what are our options, right? It's like, I could learn how to play the piano so I could teach them to play the piano. It does not seem feasible for me. I'm not that musically talented. I'm not interested. Well, we could, again, hire the lady down the street or whatever, that quintessential, teacher like we all had when we were young. But now there's all these online options. I don't know if they're any good, but I know my son learned guitar, taught himself online, and he's got some music talent. He was involved with violin up through 8th grade. Then the high school that he went to didn't offer an orchestra, so he switched to guitar and taught himself and just plays for fun. So I know it's possible, but there's kind of the same concept around college planning or taxes, or repairing your car, or cleaning your house. Some families look at it and go, it's overwhelming and I can't do it, or don't. And some families look at it and say, I could do it, I don't want to. Most of us don't change our own oil or fix our own brakes anymore. I distinctly remember my dad doing that a lot, but that's kind of a bygone era. Most people just don't do that stuff anymore. It's more complicated. Cars are full of computers now. It's not as easy as it used to be. Same thing around college. It's getting more expensive and more complicated. And the downside for mistakes, the cost of it, if a student, changes majors and has to go an extra year, that's a real cost, and it could be substantial. So if there's things you did for a course or something where the student did something and to help them pick the major, and it actually helped, and they didn't change their major, that was well worth it. Yeah. But it's really hard to determine, well, was it because of the course? What would I have done had I not taken the course? Was the course worth it? I have the distinct advantage of I often save a lot more than I cost. Right, because you're doing the finance piece, Exactly, right? So it's like, well, if we do this, we save taxes. If we do this, we negotiate with the school, the worst they say is no. And if we do it right, maybe they give us a couple $1,000, and I can coach them through the process. If we, again, here's how scholarships work. This is how need-based aid works. For a lot of families, need-based aid planning is effective. For other families, you're not going to get need-based aid no matter what you do. So let's focus on merit aid or athletics or saving and investing. So there's lots of different moving parts now. And the better you plan, the better you understand, the better your puzzle fits together. So where can listeners find you? Yeah. So I have a website, tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. And my podcast is by the same name is there, as well as wherever podcasts are sold, as they say. So I've got Taming the High Cost of College is the podcast. Tamingthehighcostofcollege.com is my website. We mentioned the Scholarship Guide for Busy Parents is a free resource. There's also cost of colleges by state and other things that can help in a preliminary situation. And, again, there's articles and 150 podcasts on all kinds of topics around this stuff. EFC calculator, which will soon be the SAI calculator, which is a way for families to help calculate how much aid they might qualify for, similar to the calculators on the websites of the colleges, but this one's, not on a college, so it's a little more useful, and it's videos that explain it. So lots of good information. And then if you need more than that, feel free to reach out and see if there's a fit as far as what we might be able to do. Yeah, I did look through your website. I found it very helpful. So I definitely am going to fiddle with that calculator for sure. Question for you though, financial aid
is it like if they give you a certain amount the first year, is it guaranteed for all the years, or do you have to redo it every year?
You'd redo it every year. So typically, if things stay about the same, your aid will stay about the same. So colleges don't really want to have that bait and switch type of thing where you were a freshman, we gave you a lot of stuff, but now that we have you, we're going to change it. We're going to really charge you a lot. Well, that reputation got out college, it would ruin the college's process.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Right. They just generally don't do that. But on the other side of that coin is colleges really only want to talk about 1 year at a time. So it's like, well, this year it's just me going to college, but 2 years from now, we're going to have 3 kids in college. So that changes our ability to pay and that kind of stuff. A lot of the colleges ideally will say, well, we'll talk about that when you're a junior and you've got, brothers and sisters that are freshmen. That makes it hard to plan to say, well, am I going to get a break because it was the other way around. If you started with lots of kids and then started losing kids, you'd at least know what kind of discount you got with lots of kids. So there's a little bit of nuance in there around. But generally, if things stay the same, you're going to get about the same offer typically. But when things change, that's where it gets challenging. Like we mentioned, there's a lot of federal aid and that type of stuff. Well, if your income climbs and all of a sudden you lose that federal aid.
Yeah.
And that could be legitimate. And conversely, I've seen a lot of situations, where families are divorcing or something and things change the other way, where now there's some opportunities of, well, if we, shift the assets around the right way or something, we can, divorce is never fun or good, but at least we can maybe get some additional college benefit out of it or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Or I guess a loss of a job or something like that, where maybe a family member is no longer working or something.
Right. Exactly.
I
was a high paid executive at this company. I lost my job and now I'm a lower paid executive at this other company because I couldn't find something similar. Those types of things happen. And that, or the other way around, if I got a huge bonus this year, now I'm disqualified from aid potentially. And that would be another example of something, well, maybe you could go back to the college and negotiate a little bit, maybe not, depending on the situation and what the college ultimately thinks. So,
So what advice would you give parents that are going through this in the next year or two?
Yes. Well, I guess the first thing is you need to start earlier than you realize. With the new FAFSA changes, as an example, there's a lot more opportunity for need-based aid. But you mentioned your daughter's starting in 2024. Well, what happens for your first year is going to be based on 2022 taxes, which most people are doing right now. But there might have been things you could have done to make 2022 better or not. I don't know. Right. But most people haven't even thought about it when they're starting their college process. I've got a few families I'm working with right now where we haven't finalized 2022 yet because we're still trying to figure out if there's things that they can do that might improve their situation for the long run, or at least not make any mistakes. So another great example is working with a family that has some inheritance, and there's potential tax problems if you don't do the right things with an inheritance, and that will flow through to their tax return, which will then flow through to their financial aid. They may, again, a lot of families inadvertently do something and not realizing that the impact that it had.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the big picture as well. It's tough to do, parents can do stuff, when you have a high school freshman. I mean, the students probably are too young and still trying to figure out high school, but parents can start figuring out if we're going to qualify for need-based aid or merit aid, and again, if you're a business owner, there's more opportunities and more stuff to move around. And so there's lots that you could get involved in earlier as a way to kind of spread things out. And then the student, I have a sophomore and I've done done one college visit with my daughter so far. Thinking about another. Now they're a very low pressure. Hey, let's just go check out the local college. Well, why? Well, because you can't figure out what majors you're interested in. So they got a bunch of majors you never heard of. You want to go learn about them? Yeah, I guess. Okay, so let's go. Because, I've been on a lot of college campuses. This is my third. So I've toured with my older boys, but my daughter didn't go with. She hasn't seen a lot of colleges. So you got to remember that when you ask a student, are you interested in a big school or a small school? They may not have any frame of reference of what a big school and a small school is. So how can they answer the question if they've never seen or have any recollection of what big and small or near and far or public or private or all the different things of, when I was a kid, I distinctly remember being turned off by a very urban campus where the college was right downtown and there was no green spaces hardly.
Yeah.
And I had grown up in a small town, where there was a lot of green spaces, and it just seems so foreign to me that it just turned me off. To this day, I remember that as being a very initial shock of, oh my God, people actually live here. So you're getting some of that out of your system so that students can then move on from there and say, well, what am I looking for? What am I looking for? Big or small or urban or rural, or do I want to be in that stadium with 50,000 of my closest friends cheering on the team? Or am I more interested in, where the biology students have their labs? And then, so you can kind of, I call it college visits 101 and then college visits 201 of 101, you do what everybody does. 201, you say, how do I make this better for us? Is there certain things that we need to learn? Are there certain people we need to talk to? Whatever it is, because if you ask, generally a lot of the colleges will provide additional meetings or whatever, but you have to know enough to ask. They'll actually allow you to sit in a class or get you in touch with a student that is in the major that you're considering or whatever it might be.
Wow. Yeah, those are great things. And I love that you started early, because I think junior year, at least for us, is really tough. I mean, they have to take the SATs and they're really getting, it's like the last year, their grades are really, really imperative too. And there's just a lot of pressure in junior year. It seems like that, starting to look for college is a little overwhelming. So it's nice to introduce it a little bit earlier. So it doesn't feel like all at once.
Yeah. I mean, that is absolutely true. The challenge of getting everything done all at once is overwhelming. Another analogy is we pay for college with money, of course, but we also pay it with time and stress. Time being similar to the airplane ticket, right? You spend a lot of time looking for an airplane ticket, then maybe you can find one for less money. You spend a lot of time kicking the tires and understanding the college process, there's a good chance you'll spend less money than if you just stumble through it. But then the stress one of, well, it would be great if our students, got fantastic grades, good test scores, still went to prom and did all the kid stuff that they'd like to do, had a summer job and earned a lot of money, did all their test prep and took the test multiple times and then filled out 50 scholarship applications. But that's a big ask. That generally doesn't happen. There's some kids that do some of those things or most of those things, but there's a lot of families where it just isn't going to happen that way. We don't have the time to do it all. So we have to pick and choose which of these pieces is more or less important just to manage the stress around, who's going to do all this. And just the application process is enough for a lot of families where they're like, applying for scholarships doesn't seem like it's in the cards. The additional, especially when you don't have any time, right? Because you're still trying to finish up your school visits and all the stuff that you could have done junior year. All that stuff needs to be done while you're rolling into senior year and applying and visiting and everything else.
And you don't want to be fighting with your kid the last year that they might be living in your house either. So it's nice to make it a little less stressful if possible.
Right. And a clue there might be to incorporate someone that's not mom and dad.
Yeah.
I think there's a big stress point around, for my son, he had a lot of essay work to do, and we actually had a family friend that worked with him and he was very generous because it was probably 7 or 8 hours of actual contact time where they wrote and rewrote and rewrote the essay till it was as good as it could be. And so that's kind of what happened there. And I couldn't add that kind of value. I'm not an essay expert. And the fact that it wasn't me was a big, he took it more seriously than if it was me, because I'm dad and I don't know anything.
Right. Totally. You have enough stuff to fight about, really.
Exactly.
And I do know schools have some services too. Like I know some of those things can be pretty pricey as well. Like they have college, I guess, counselors that are helping. But there's the schools usually have some sort of programs that could also help with essays, whether it's in their classes. I know our school helps a little bit with that. Then they start to write their essays in their LA class. So that is helpful.
Right, for sure. And a lot of times, especially if you're paying for a private high school, there's some additional college services that you're paying for it because you're paying tuition to go to the private school. But as long as you have already paid for it, you may as well take advantage of it. So yeah, there's like I said, there's lots of experts out there in various categories. You just have to, find one that you can work with and then figure out, again, sometimes it's a low cost option is good enough. Just read a book or take an online course. And sometimes hiring someone that can help with nitty gritty tax details is the solution. So it just depends.
Well, thank you, Brad. This was it was such a great discussion. I mean, obviously I needed it. I'm in the midst of this and I'm headed out to look at colleges next week. So I really appreciate it. I'm going to jump on your website and get some of those resources before I even go. So as she's looking, I already know what I'm getting into.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Brad has so many resources to help you navigate the cost of college. So visit his website at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. And don't forget to share this episode with your friends. If you want to continue to help support the Real Life Momz podcast, you can become a subscriber for just $1.99 a month. You will receive access to archived episodes, early access to new episodes, access to send in your questions to upcoming guests, and monthly bonus episodes. And if you'd like to just make a one-time donation to support Real Life Momz, click on the link in the show notes to buy me a coffee. We appreciate you supporting Real Life Momz so that we can continue to help one mom at a time.